you don't seem to argue that feeling patriotic isn't bad. You just seem to argue that you don't feel patriotic. So I wondered if those problems that you've mentioned didn't exist, would you then feel patriotic? And then is that sentiment that's kind of personified in art and music and poetry that kind of gives people a stake in society? Is that then a bad thing? Because it seems so far that what you've argued is that you don't feel patriotic, not that it's bad, and that you want the pride back. So surely the pride and the patriotism is then a good thing.
Thank you very much. We'll take another couple of questions for responses. Yes, in there in the middle. Yeah.
Mario Johnson College. This is a question for the proposition. So you have made the argument that patriotism is not bad. Very successfully, you have absolutely convinced me of that. However, I feel as though things could sit in the middle between being good or being bad. In your speeches, you have taken for granted almost that we all accept that patriotism in its purest form is a good thing, instead of making the case for it to be a good thing, rather than being, neither good or bad. So could you please elaborate on that?
We'll take a couple more questions.
Mrs. Freeman, if poverty and patriotism are so inextricably linked, why is it precisely the opposite of groups you care about? The urban, metropolitan, liberal elite who seem to be the ones that despise Britain rather than people that you have so much sympathy for.
We'll take one more question for responses. Yes, in the green jumper. Yeah, in the second row.
Emily Gray. To further on the point of you want to feel patriotic, surely the whole point of patriotism is you have a stake in your country, you want to make it better. And it's entirely what you want. You want to make your country better, you want it to be better for everyone in it. That's entirely the point of patriotism. And like the proposition said, anyone can be patriotic, so any group can claim that stake and use it to better their country.
Thank you very much for those questions. Who would like to go first with responses to those? Any quick responses? Yeah.
I did argue that I don't feel patriotic, but I only did that as a compliment to the main theme, which was that patriotism may have done some good in the past, but today is not any place, is not anymore for good.
Yes, I thought that gentleman over there's point was very, very good, and actually I should have explained that one more clearly. That patriotism has a unifying, that feel-good feeling that you get when you watch the England team, for the sake of example, beat, say, Germany. It's a good feeling, and it unites us as a people. We need those moments where we feel that we are, I hate to use the phrase common purpose because it's been rather taken by my enemies, but nevertheless there is some truth, I think, in that if we have a sense of common purpose, it gets us through times of crisis. One is 2 world wars and 1 World Cup. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, especially if we're not in the business of going to invade other countries to demonstrate the strength of our patriotism. If that helps answer your bit.
Do you guys want to come back on that point at all, or are you happy to go to further questions?
Well, just to say that when I first came to this country, I did love it. I did love it because there was a health service. I did love it because there was a welfare state. I did love many things about it, which I feel are not the same as they were in the past. And that saddens me. And I want it to be that country where everyone feels they have an access to it in the way that they have a stake in it and can feel a sense of pride. And I don't recognize this term, metropolitan elite. Are you saying that people from London, or I am from Chicago, and if you have a particular job, I mean, my father was a truck driver. Am I still part of the metropolitan elite? I mean, I find these terms are just used in order to denigrate people, and I think we have to get to a stage where we actually have grown-up debate about things and do not rely on slogans to dismiss people who you may disagree with them, but do not hide behind a slogan.
Say something.
If you have a response to say
I was going to respond to Emily actually. I think your point is a very good one about anyone can claim to be patriotic. Well, I think they give themselves away there. It's like the example the lady gave about posters. I think that was disgrace. And it's, you know, what gives them away is hating others, hating foreigners. That's not patriotism, that's nationalism. That's quite clear.
Yeah, if it wasn't a Jussie Smollett as well, we don't know. I mean, you know, we pluck one crazy example from the air. You know, well, there was another example of this. There was the Polish chap who was attacked allegedly because of Brexit hatred. And when the court case came out, it turned out that this 40-something Pole had been standing around with his mates, had seen a group of kids much younger than them, had made some racist insults to the kids, and been attacked. And this was misrepresented as a kind of racist attack on an innocent Pole because of Brexit. I think sometimes the narrative overtakes the reality, and I think we need to be aware of that.
Would you like to come back?
Well, just
very
to,
quickly.
yes, just to say that national police federations have talked about an increase in racial attacks following the Brexit vote. I mean, so that, and you know, not every case is going to stand up, but you know, these are facts that, you know, police officers have actually talked about, and why they were worried about the events of last week and whether they were going to lead to an increase in attack. And people have been attacked for speaking Polish on a bus to their Polish child. So I think we have to deal with certain facts, and we have to demand that politicians are much more positive about people who live in Britain, and I think that could help to create a much different and healthier climate than the one we currently have.
Right, shall we move on to a few more questions, as I seem to be quite a few. Yes, in the middle, yeah. Yeah, you can point.
I request clarification of the position. Do you think there's something a little bit about this patriotism in the UK, for example, where it seems to be being patriotic by perhaps denigrating other countries? And I realise that perhaps, James, I think you were being facetious when you were saying things about American tea and German football and so on. But there seems to be this tendency, and I find it particularly in the UK and perhaps in the States as well, about British patriotism coming at the expense of other countries. And as someone that grew up abroad, mainly in Europe, as in on the continent, it's something that I find particularly in the UK, that there's like a weird kind of superiority complex that British people feel like they have over other countries. And I just find it a little bit strange. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Further questions? Yes. Yeah.
This is a question for both sides. To what extent do you think that recent political upheavals, so for example Brexit, Trump and more recently Boris, have been driven not by economic concerns but by concerns to do with, for example, culture, identity and the pace of change in the West generally? What I'm thinking of is that example, I can't remember it specifically, where Gordon Brown encountered this person he was canvassing, and she brought up immigration and the pace of change in her community, and off camera he was caught saying something to the effect of, oh, she's an old bigoted woman, or something like that. And I'm not trying to suggest that the opposition in this debate have adopted that attitude, but what I am interested in is whether you believe, we've heard the term liberal metropolitan elite, who have generally been seen to look down on patriotism. Would you recognise that precisely that attitude of looking down on patriotism and not seeing any role for it to play inadvertently leads to the political upheavals that we're seeing? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Take a couple more questions. Yes, in the middle. Yes. Yes.
You make a very valid distinction between what you view as nationalism and what you view as patriotism. But if patriotism is truly to be a force for good, then how do we prevent patriotism being manipulated by those with ignoble intentions to promote a nationalistic campaign?
Very much. One more question before moving to responses. Yes, on the end of the bench. Yes. Yeah.
This is a question for James.
Could you address your question to
one side
or the other?
Anyway. If you're such a patriot, as you very strongly claim to be, then why do you so consistently and so strongly show such contempt for climate change, which is probably going to be the main threat and destroyer of your patriotism?
Thanks very much. I mean, who wants to go first in response to those? I mean, please try and keep it focused on the motion.
Yeah, well, I'd say, I'd say, I thought I'd sort of made the point about that there's something amused and self-deprecating about English patriotism, whereby we send ourselves up, and maybe the fact that you've been living on the continent for so long means that you haven't quite absorbed this aspect of our culture, but we do have a sense of humour about it. We're not aggressive in our patriotism, where it's good-natured. Climate change, I'm not sure really what that has to do with this debate.
It's going to destroy your country, so you can't...
Well, yeah, but it's not, all right?
Please keep it focused on the motion, do you have any responses to the questions from the opposition?
Question number was the person that asked about patriotism. Yes, patriotism being ignored as one of the reasons for recent political upheavals, such as Brexit and Trump. I believe personally that there is a lot to do with the pace of change in society to these political upheavals, and especially the housing crisis and the fact that people have thought that a new world that offers much less safety, both in terms of, occupation and jobs, but also emotionally, in which relationships are becoming much more superficial, in which houses are shrinking, in which families are becoming smaller. I think that is the major factor behind the recent uptick in nationalism across the globe.
Well, and just to follow on from that, because we have communities, and certainly in the northeast and elsewhere in Britain, who have lost their economic base, which also means they lose their cultural and social base as well. And I think because of the way austerity has developed and made profound changes in people's lives, that this is going to breed resentment, and I think it is part of what is feeding this. But I think these issues are very complicated, and I wouldn't think that I wouldn't want to suggest that it's only one thing that is feeding the rise of Trump or Boris Johnson, or indeed the other strongman leaders that we find, whether it's in Hungary or Brazil or the Philippines. And I think we have to, in a sense, change the channel and try to think about how we're going to make society better for everyone. And I don't think many governments are asking that sort of question, because if they're getting what they want in terms of within the opinion polls, or indeed being elected to office, they're not interested in turning the page. And I think if we don't do that, I think we're going to pay for it in another way.
Do you have any comments from me?
Yes, just to say to the lady at the back, if the British are superior, you could be patriotic about another country if you want. I mean, this is the choice. We're talking about patriotism as a concept or in general. I think actually British superiority is just our sense of humour in many ways, and you can see that through our sense of humour. But you have that option, the motion is wide enough today to be patriotic about another country that isn't superior, do you know what I mean? I think in terms of manipulation, that was mentioned, I think that's a valid point. But I would say BNP, where are they now? I mean, when I was first an MEP, we had 2 BNP members of the European Parliament. They're gone, they disappeared, you know, and I just don't think it's the British way. And if you love your own country, you can express it in a non-racist, non-nationalist way. I think these forces just go away. It didn't work in the fascists during the Second World War. They were actually allowed to demonstrate in the middle of the Second World War, but they didn't win. And I think that's the strength of our system.
Very much. We'll have one more round of questions before we move to summations. Yes, right at the back. Yeah.
Yeah, so the narratives focus on what patriotism can be. But the big area of debate is what it has been. You mentioned at the start of your speech, the spinning Jenny, and you had a different remark of, you know, British history's been great. But you have to look at what patriotism has done. It's, you know, created the horrible subversion of the British Empire, and it's all been whitewashed. This idea that patriotism is great as a concept, but you can't take the historical perspective from the concept. And secondly, all the people who you described as nationalists would then describe themselves as patriots, loving their country. You know, it's a concept that can be taken, it's one step away from nationalism, and you cannot deny that. That's just something really out of this debate.
A few more questions? Yes, please try and keep it short.
Okay, yeah, I will keep it relatively brief. The question is, you might presume, but you know, I'll do my best. So anyway, I'm not sure if there are many leftists here today. I think that's pretty self-evident. But what I will say is that leftists do generally, and I am one of them, by the way, just to clarify, you know, we do probably have a tendency to view the question of patriotism from an extremely Eurocentric point of view. And in that, what I'm saying, or what I intend to say right now, is that we must not forget that patriotism is an essential part of the post-colonial process. So, for example, in combating foreign intervention in Latin America, patriotism has been extremely useful. It's been extremely useful as well in asserting a post-colonial identity independent of colonially imposed hierarchies. It's been necessary in many instances to aid a sort of social cohesion against the global hegemon. I'm not going to name any names, but we all know who we're talking about. And it's been used very effectively in the politics of people like Rafael Correa, Evo Morales, Gandhi, and dare I say it, in various Palestinian liberation movements as well. But of course, it's also undeniable that patriotism does divide. In the UK, it's often used to distract from the more prominent class divide, which separates people far more than nationality in this country. Patriotism in many cases even requires the establishment... Okay, I'm almost there. Okay, it requires the establishment of an other. You need a sort of someone who's not involved in the social group in order for patriotism to actually, or national identity to actually be a thing. And in certain instances, this is justifiable in that if your oppressor is if your opponent is your oppressor, then it's useful to push back against them. However, in many instances, it also serves as a divide and conquer strategy on behalf of the capitalist elite. So in that sense, what I will say is patriotism, the question as to whether it's good or bad, is entirely circumstantial, and I recommend you abstain from this motion. Thank you very much.
I'll take a couple more questions. I remind you that if you still, as there is a load of questions, if you do not get a chance to ask them as I want to move on to summations, please come up and say your name and college and collect a invitation back to our reading room, and we'll try and fit you in. There'll be free wine next to you as a little perk. So, who should we go for? Right. Someone, yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Emma.
No problem.
I also like something that hasn't been mentioned in the debate yet, and this could go either way really, is how weird patriotism is as a concept. I mean, speaker on the proposition mentioned sort of loyalty and love. I mean, those are sort of natural biological concepts, but there's nothing natural and biological about patriotism stopping once they get to, right to the Scottish border. But, it's a really strange concept. Lots of my family lived in the Soviet Union. They woke up one day and they're in a different country and they were told to be patriotic to that country. What I suggest is why I'm bringing this question mostly to the opposition, is that that force that a state has to allow patriotism to flourish means that different communities across the country that don't know each other at all can unite, so that you don't have sort of sectarian tensions. So patriotism is a force for good in that sense. But just wanted to point out how weird it is as a concept.
Thank you much. A couple more. Yes. Yes.
So Elliot Franti, Baylor College, just visiting. There's something they haven't mentioned is centrality of social institutions for patriotism, and separately this point about British humour, having grown up in both Germany and the UK, well placed to appreciate British humour, the same British humour that's led to our house being bricked the last 3 years. But yeah, so social institutions, what role does it have in this mystical feeling?
One more question. Yes.
Sirish Archbrook, Collingwood. I know a hard name, but I've got 2 questions. Is that okay? Yeah.
Keep them brief.
Yeah, okay. So to the proposition, you somehow seem to have 2 contradictory points where patriotism is a natural born thing, and yet you can choose what country to be patriotic for. So I thought you could clarify that. And for the opposition, could you at least recognize you call patriotism outdated, but could you at least recognize that there are people right now in the police or armed forces who have that patriotism, who are working for you to keep you safe, and maybe it's not just these grand ideas, but maybe this guy is working at the civil service or down in some industry who have this patriotism that is driving them forward, says making you and this society and where we live in a bit better. So maybe calling outdated is not recognizing that.
I'll try and keep responses to those questions. There's quite a few of them.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you first, so you ask me first, because I don't know, just feel more natural. I never said that patriotism can't be a force for good today. I never said that patriotism has never been a force for good at any point. I just said that patriotism is not going to be a force for good, and on average it's not nowadays. And there are people in the police and people that are motivated by patriotic values that do good things, but sort of passing on moral judgment. So yeah, I'll answer the questions. I hope that was it. Or if you want.
Yeah, the sense I can feel is that you're more into like civic pride and things like that.
Yes, yes, exactly. I don't understand why altruism and trying to protect other people cannot be spurred by other sentiments, like being citizens of the world or being citizens of humanity. That's the answer I would give to you as well. But more specifically, you mentioned the fact that patriotism unites communities within a country, and it does. And it has done that. It has done that in Italy and many other countries. So it was very divided before, and now we're one country. And I think we're ready to take it up a notch and unite as humanity. And I think that the patriotism that we were, using in the 19th century, it's probably not that beneficial anymore. I mean, before it was a very driving force in the liberalization of society, anti-clericalism, and bringing infrastructure to areas that benefited from it. But now it's not. Now it's a reason for squabble between states that in the international cooperation. Yeah.
Do you have any points from the opposition?
The gentleman up there, who was kind of half supporting what we were saying, but I dispute the notion that patriotism isn't a natural thing like love or courage or whatever. It's something that you mentioned Russia. Obviously I'm not Russian myself, but in the few bits of Russian literature, there's a very strong sense of what it means to be Russian, and that seems to transcend whichever regime is in power at any one time. I mean, I think people living through Stalin. When you read Life and Fate, for example, you get a sense that okay, this communism horror that they're going through is something over and above what it means to be Russian. They're separate things. And I think this is a mistake that we've heard this evening from the other side. This idea that patriotism has anything to do with politics, with the regime in power at any one time. It's about apolitical things. It's about the way you think, the way you behave. It's about weird customs. It's about whether you put the jam on the cream or the other way around. It's tiny details like that transcend the divide between left and right. And that, of course, is what's so good about patriotism, that it unites disparate political groups and in a sense of nationhood. And I don't mean that makes them nationalists. I just mean that it binds a country, it binds a people in a good way.
Can I just say that I think when people think about patriotism, they're not thinking about tea and cake. And, you know, it may be about some trivial things, but it's about also some very big things as well. And certainly we know that politicians exploit it, and whether it's nationalism or patriotism, you know, we're dealing with big forces here. And we have to accept that, and we have to look very carefully that these forces are not taking away things. I mean, I'm very concerned about what's going to happen to the judges, to the BBC, to a whole host of institutions in this country, which may, and as if we look at what's happening across the channel, not across the channel, across the ocean, the Atlantic, that these things are being diminished, and I think we really have to stand up and take notice about certain things that are happening, regardless of what we call it. But these are the certain realities, and people are using patriotism as part of that whole mission to decrease some of the things that are really precious about this country.
And also, if I may add, I don't think it's very honest to say that patriotism is entirely not about politics. I mean, even the opposition mentioned Brexit when talking about patriotism, and they mentioned patriotism as a motivation for Brexit, which I believe that you can still do without the EU. I don't understand what if you view patriotism as simply this love for tea and love for other things, then it's not even a force.
That's because you didn't understand what Brexit was about.
I think with that we shall move on to summation speeches. So I believe making the case for the opposition is Edie Freeman. Would you feel free to make the case? You have 5 minutes to summarise your case opposing the motion.
Much less than that. That you made about patriotism and nationalism becoming one and the same is a really important one. And I think we have to be careful not to get so hung up on language that we don't see certain realities. And I think, you know, through the use of slogans, which, you know, as we know, our society is more and more addicted to slogans. And I think we have to actually look at what's happening. And I think your point was a really important one. Because we know that politicians, certain sections of the press, people who go to football games are exploiting patriotism. And I think we have to take a lot of notice of that. Because as someone else said, having patriotism means you are othering someone else. There is someone who isn't included in your group, and I think we have to. And in our society, because of what we now have is gross inequality, and a report just out today by the Crown Tree Foundation gives us a very clear picture of the level of poverty and inequality in this country. And it's poverty in families where many people actually work. And, you know, do we really want to, can we feel pride in a country where we have such gross inequality, which means that many people do not have that opportunity to participate fully and feel patriotic about their country. So just to sum up, I think we have to see patriotism in terms of social solidarity, in terms of working together, just trying to create a more equal and fairer society for everyone who lives here. So I would commend that you defeat this motion this evening and think very critically as you move to the next stage in life, how we're going to make Britain a fairer, happier society, whether you want to call it patriotism or not. Thank you.
I now invite James Denningpole to make the case for the proposition and close the debate as a whole.
We just heard from the opposition that we shouldn't get hung up on language. Actually, that is rather the point. The motion is patriotism is a force for good. So we can't start twisting it to mean something other than what the words actually say. And Orwell, who was indeed one of our great masters of nuance and the English language, I just want to repeat what he said, because I think it's absolutely key. By patriotism, I mean devotion to a particular place and a particular way of life, which one believes to be the best in the world, but which one has no wish to force on other people. Patriotism is very, very distinct from its bastard cousin, nationalism, and I think we shouldn't conflate the two. That's a dirty trick. We heard from the opposition a very convincing case about why nationalism is a bad thing. We also heard how one cannot be patriotic about countries which don't share one's left-wing ideals. But I'm not sure that we necessarily had a very compelling argument against patriotism. To quote another of our great philosophers, the late and magnificent and much missed Roger Scruton, patriotism is another word really for oikophilia, that love of home. And we all feel that. And there's nothing wrong with feeling a love for your home. We feel it about our families, we feel it about our friends, we feel it about the place where we go to study, our alma mater, indeed, and we feel it about our country. And this is a good thing, it's a binding force, it brings us together in a good way, mostly. The fact that sometimes people can exploit it in unhealthy directions, that's like an argument for saying that we should ban the car in case somebody drunk drives. It's not really an argument. I mean, that's one of the prices you pay for freedom and free will, that sometimes good things are subverted to bad ends. But that is not an argument against patriotism. Patriotism is good and tends towards the good. I rest my case. I urge you to support the motion.